think there are probably a number of elements to a good collection model, Nick. I think, first and foremost, really, systems. I think a system is absolutely key. You want something that can identify debt early, preferably whilst it's still a current tenant, and prevent that debt from happening. I think with former tenant arrears, systems that maintain a focus on arrangements and look at the prospect of collection versus the age of debt are really important. Arrangements is often a common outcome. If you're successfully making contact, you come to an arrangement. But also understanding the where to focus resources, the age of debt's really important, a system that helps you to do that. I think a system that gives officers a common solution to what they're using for current tenant arrears. So our own customers using RentSense, our former tenant arrears module, a common platform, same look and feel, helps that seamless transition. And then I think a system that allows performance to be monitored and measured is really important as well. If you can get from that system the right reports, data and information, then that will really help you understand how you're performing and improve on that performance ultimately. I think the second one would be thinking about your model, how you have your team set up. And it varies by organisation. Some organisations will have dedicated officers, others it'll be the responsibility of the officers managing the current tenant arrears as well. I think there's no right or wrong answer, it depends on the organisation. I think they've all got strengths and weaknesses. I think if you've got FTA officers, a specialist, they're going to be highly focused, they're going to understand how a former tenant arrears and those interactions are markedly different. You don't necessarily have the option of taking someone to court or perhaps a tenant being concerned with losing the home. However, the flip side, if you look at a current tenant arrears officer also managing a former tenant debt, then the advantage there is they've seen the whole customer journey throughout and they've managed that whole transition and much more familiar with the case. And they're not in a position where they might be just transforming former tenant debt to another officer. I think the third would be to look at processes. So what tends to happen with former tenant arrears is it can protract over time. People trying to manage debt that are 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. So maintaining a limited time frame is really important. Act quickly and get the outcome you want, whatever it is, whether it's write-off or collection, concluded as quickly as possible. I think processes that have got a creative approach to locating tenant are really important as well. If you can't find or locate that tenant, you can't have the conversation. And again, this can be helping teams at the front end get better at collecting data about where a tenant's moving to, but also the detective skills which make that type of role quite unique are really, really important. I think thinking differently as well about a former tenant debt. If you're looking at a customer who has perhaps left you after working through an escalation process, you could argue that that escalation process didn't work because the tenant left and they left in debt. So why would you do an escalation process again? You might want to adopt a different, more constructive style. I think from an attitude perspective or an expectation perspective, sometimes former tenant debt is viewed as inevitably written off. I think part of your process should embed that expectation that you will collect the former tenant debt and it's not a foregone conclusion that it's written off. And I think being pragmatic about the cost of collection is important as well. You can certainly bring in more revenue than a service and systems might cost you. That's definitely achievable. But there are lots of other good reasons to manage former tenant arrears. And we spoke about some of those earlier. So the impact on the tenant and their future choices is certainly one. But also it helps tenants more broadly understand and appreciate that former tenant debt isn't tolerated by that organisation or by the sector, and are less likely to encounter debt in the future, even if it's not with yourself but with another landlord. I think the fourth point would be to be thinking about people. There is a specific skill set with a former tenant arrears officer, I think. You've got to have that ability to negotiate without the sanction of court and eviction. You've got to have those detective skills we talked about earlier. You've got to be creative, dogmatic, really driven and motivated by collection or a positive tenant outcome, or both ideally. And I think having an ability to influence other roles in the organisation is important for a former tenant arrears officer. You know, you're going to want a case that's moved over to you with all the contact details there, the right history, the right notes. The only way you're really going to be able to do that is if you can communicate well with your colleagues in those other areas.